the University of Connecticut, and he's pursuing a PhD from the same university. He just returned from Jefferson Lab in Newport News, Virginia, where he was engaged in nuclear physics research. He is a convert from Lutheranism in 2009, and I will hand you over to him to speak about youth and academia. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for that introduction. Like Dan said, I've been a confirmed Catholic for over 2 years now, and it's been quite a journey. I've learned quite a bit about Catholicism, myself, and the world as a whole, and I know I'm just starting to scratch the surface. Being someone with a scientific mind, it was the sensibility of Catholicism that first led me to it. The Church, with her unwavering, commonsensical stance on abortion, seemed to be the only institution that hadn't lost its mind on the issue. The philosophy of the great thinkers of the Church not only answered my objections to the faith, but raised new objections I had never even considered and answered them too. For these reasons, it always struck me as very odd that so many of my peers in the academic community disagreed with my new theological views. Since my conversion, I have been interested in trying to figure out why such disagreements exist. I certainly don't have all the answers, but I thought it would be beneficial to share with you some of my observations and thoughts on the present academic situation and how it relates to the future of Catholicism in this country and in the world. It's difficult to overstate the importance of proper education. And by proper education, I'm talking about quality over quantity. I'm not saying everybody needs to be a scientist or a doctor or an engineer, but it's extremely important we all have a very firm grasp on the fundamentals. Pope Benedict spoke of an educational emergency in an address to members of the Congregation for Catholic Education this past February. He said, "Educational work seems to be becoming ever more arduous because, in a culture which all too often makes relativism its creed, the light of truth is lacking." G.K. Chesterton also knew the danger of poor education, saying, "The state did not own men so entirely, even when it could send them to the stake, as it sometimes does now, where it can send them to the elementary school." It is a frightening truth that in this culture, many seeds of secularism and materialism are planted in children before they even know how to multiply and divide. Having spent the last 6 years at secular universities, I've seen these seeds grow and bear fruit, but the fruit is always rotten. Many vices, especially promiscuity, dishonesty, and addiction, are running rampant, and many of the virtues are just laughed at. In many cases, religion is at best seen as a family tradition not to be taken too seriously, and at worst, seen as a disease that needs to be eradicated. These days, academic settings from elementary school through college are very dangerous places for young people. While they certainly can and should be places where students can grow and come to a better understanding of truth, this sadly is not the case. Instead, students are often presented with inaccurate information from professors who decide to temporarily leave their area of expertise and become very amateur theologians. For example, here's a quote from the renowned and respected physicist Richard Feynman. Quote, "Often people in some unjustified fear of physics say you can't write an equation of life. Well, perhaps we can. As a matter of fact, we very possibly already have the equation to a sufficient approximation when we write the equation of quantum mechanics. We have just seen that the complexities of things can so easily and dramatically escape the simplicity of the equations which describe them. Unaware of the scope of simple equations, man has often concluded that nothing short of God, not mere equations, is required to explain the complexities of the world." Many young, impressionable minds will hear this sort of thing and take it seriously. And this is a perfect example of a growing trend that tries to claim that science can sufficiently explain everything and religion is therefore irrelevant. I recently watched a show on the Discovery Channel called "Did God Create the Universe?" And they didn't even try to hide it at all. Their conclusion was simply, no, he didn't. Many of their arguments were based on the latest book by Stephen Hawking titled The Grand Design. And again, a lot of young, impressionable minds will see this sort of thing and take it seriously. And it's a very dangerous thing in our culture today. I find many of these arguments to be intellectually dishonest, but even with this aside, there is another peculiarity to this trend. And one of the great things I find about being Catholic is that any objection has already been answered by some of the greatest thinkers to ever live. And I already quoted Chesterton, but I'm a big fan of him, so I'm going to turn to him again to answer and talk about this peculiarity that I'm speaking of. In his chapter titled The Maniac, from his book Orthodoxy, Chesterton points out how a maniac's philosophy is often fairly sound, logically speaking, but he just completely misses the big picture. For example, if you tell a madman that his peers are not conspiring against him, he might reply, "That is exactly what you would tell me if everybody was conspiring against me." His argument makes sense, but he's still wrong. Chesterton says, the madman is not the man who has lost his reason. The madman is the man who has lost everything except his reason. Now, he's not attacking reason, he's just making an important observation and pointing out that although reason can lead us to truth, it's not the only thing that can lead us to truth. And in some instances, reason alone is insufficient in leading us to truth. Chesterton then draws an analogy between the maniac and the modern atheistic scientific materialist. He says, as an explanation of the world, materialism has a sort of insane simplicity. It has just the qualities of the madman's argument. We have at once the sense of it covering everything and the sense of it leaving everything out. Contemplate some able and sincere materialist, and you will have exactly this unique sensation. He understands everything, and everything does not seem worth understanding. His cosmos may be complete in every rivet and cogwheel, but still his cosmos is smaller than our world. Somehow his scheme, like the lucid scheme of the madman, seems unconscious of the alien energies and large indifference of the earth. It is not thinking of the real things of the earth, of fighting peoples, of proud mothers, or first love, or fear upon the sea. I especially love that last sentence. I'd really like to see someone like Richard Feynman try to use quantum mechanics to explain things like fighting peoples, or proud mothers, or first love, or fear upon the sea. If he can't do it, he should probably stop claiming he has a so-called equation of life. I've just spent a good amount of time criticizing the current state of the academic world, and I know I've painted a somewhat bleak picture. However, there are reasons to be hopeful, and Dan already touched on this, but each year the Cardinal Newman Society publishes a list of the best Catholic colleges in the country, and there are a lot of very good schools on that list. Also, there's an organization called FOCUS, which stands for the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. I was first introduced to them at UConn, where I currently attend. And they do a great job of evangelizing, even on the most secular of campuses, so there's a lot of promise there. Furthermore, I have observed that many of my peers are truly seeking, and of course, all who seek find. But the fact that so many are still seeking and haven't yet found means that we need to start putting more responsibility on ourselves when it comes to evangelizing and catechizing our children, our children's children, our peers, and even complete strangers if need be. Many people are fond of quoting St. Francis when he said, "Always preach the gospel, when necessary use words." This is of course true, but I recently heard a priest use this quote in a homily, and he followed it by, "Now is the time when we really need to start using words." St. Francis's quote is of course true, but we can't use that as an excuse to be timid. And again, that comes down to us putting more responsibility on ourselves to take action and to catechize and evangelize. And as Dan already talked about, there are no clever gimmicks. It just starts with prayer and sacrifice and determination. And if we can show others, if we do that, then we will end up showing others the goodness, truth, and beauty of our Catholic faith, and they will come home, even academics, and I'm living proof of that. So, thank you.